Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, and welcome to a little bit of Battlefleet Gothic. We're continuing talking a little bit about why you might be losing against each of the individual factions, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Orks. The Orks are one of those really powerful factions in the hands of a good player, and I think that they actually are probably the most powerful faction in the game right now, including Tau. I think that the Orks are actually probably a little bit stronger than the Tau, especially mainly because it's impossible for the Tau to really easily deal with tractor cannons, especially ever since the nerf to the Nixar Dao upgrades and the Nixar Dao Collins. So the Orks in particular are one of those factions that you're just going to have to sort of figure out how to play around to a certain extent, because the entire purpose of the Orks set is to be extremely good at brawling at close range in a variety of different ways, and being able to sort of defeat your opponent if they try to run, if they try to pull a runner, if they try to avoid you, if they try to evade you. So starting off, we'll talk a little bit about their basic ships here. They've got 800 hull integrity on their light cruisers, and every class of ship has 200 more hit points than their equivalent. They've also got 75 front armor. This makes them ideal for ramming, not only because they've got that 75 front armor, meaning that they deal more damage to an opposing ship. When you ram two ships together, the armor is what dictates the damage to a certain extent, as well as size, which is the hull integrity. But the Ork ships also have that high hull integrity, so if I'm going up against, say, a Imperial Navy ship and we ram each other head on, we're both going to be dealing similar amounts of damage to each other. Let's say, for argument's sake, that we both deal about 100 damage to each other. This is a sixth of the Imperial Navy ship, but that's only an eighth of my health. So this is always going to be advantageous to the Orks. There are far too many people who are willing to let the Orks get into hugging range of them and end up rubbing up against Ork ships for far too long. And while you are dealing some damage to the Ork ships, yes, you're dealing far, far more damage to yourself, allowing that Ork ship to deal tremendous damage to you that it's not going to really care about. Not only that, but these ships are cheap. We can see that a fairly basic looking Basha here is only 93 points, and even cheaper one is 87, and then you can get all the way up to 109. So these are very, very inexpensive ships here. They're able to sort of ram into you, and they don't have to care about that, because losing one of these light cruisers, it's not as much of their fleet as you losing one of your light cruisers. Virtually every other thing in the game is going to cost more than this. So anything that is a damage trade-off against Orks is usually going to be a bad call, and rams are always a damage trade-off. The next thing that you have to know about the Ork ships is their humongous versatility in terms of build. Typically, an Ork ship is going to be extremely dangerous from a side, but not all of its sides. So if we were to look at this particular variant of the Ork Basha here, I've got the lots of guns on the flank, and their damage per second total is 2. That's extremely weak. That is one of the weakest broadsides in the game. The only thing that's weaker is not having a broadside at all. On the other hand, their front gun here is the Mega Cannon. It has 12 damage per second, even though it's very RNG dependent because it has low accuracy. Even out to 3,000 range, it has low range at 3,000, and also it has some sort of difficulties penetrating thick armor. That's a lot of damage per second. If it lands a hit and that penetrates your armor, you're going to be in for a world of hurt, especially with that very high critical chance, giving the ship here extreme power if it's fighting you head on, but very, very low power if it's fighting you to the flank. By contrast, this Basha here has got the torpedoes from the front, which are modestly dangerous, but it's less than a Dauntless, for example, which has the 4 torpedoes plus the 2 turrets on top. But it also has these mega cannons to the side here, and each of these mega cannons, heavy cannons, has 4 damage per second, for 2 of them to the side being 8 damage per second. This is extremely powerful broadside damage. Again, it has that sort of lower range and low accuracy, but they're extremely powerful guns, and if you're at the broadside of this, you're probably going to be taking far more damage than you're able to dish out. They've also got a very high crit chance, making them extremely good for that purpose as well. Now, as you get to higher tier ships, you sort of look at ships making a trade-off. They have to make a conscious decision. This particular variant here has got an upgraded front-mounted gun, has got pretty decent torpedo launchers, firing 6. It's also got a pretty okay broadside with lots of heavy cannons, and it's got the lots of guns. So 10 damage per second from the side. It's got a lance weapon to the front as well as a lot of torpedoes. But you could actually make it so that's more specialized. You could make it so that this had 2 sets of lots of heavy guns to the side, giving it a massive 16 damage per second from the side there. Or I could have made it more damaging from the front, or any sort of combination in between. And this means that it's difficult to tell which side of the Orc ship is going to be the spiky bit, or even if there is going to be a particularly weak spot of it. This ship is pretty dangerous from the front, pretty dangerous from the side as well. So there's no particularly safe place to stand against it, but at the same time, it only has 10 damage per second from the flank there. That's less than the broadside of a Dominator or a Slaughter. So the trade-off for having a ship that's capable of dealing good damage from the front and good damage to the side is that it doesn't deal amazing damage anywhere, and you're going to be able to get somewhere and probably beat it. So you have to be able to recognize that as well, because if you're up against this kind of ship and you start surrounding it, you're probably putting yourself in a much worse position than you have to be. By contrast, you could have a ship that has that double broadside of heavy guns. If you're up against that and you get to the side of it, you're doing yourself a humongous disservice, because now it suddenly has 16 damage per second, which is pretty damn good. The next thing to note about the Orks is that they have got some of the best favors in the game, and a lot of their best favors work at negating some of their disadvantages. You might notice that their most deadly weapons are all short range. 3000 is often the ideal range for an Ork ship. However, they do have the ability to force an opponent to get close range to them, and that makes it so that they're quite potent in a close range bashing fight, in the sense that they're able to catch up to enemy ships. Their speed of 150, doesn't actually make them seem like they'd be good at catching a faster fleet, but their abilities let them do so pretty well. So let's go into the favors and figure out why that is. So first of all, let's talk about the Evil Sunz clan. They've got the bigger red button. This lets them use the combustion gauge to refill their big red button faster. And the big red button is actually one of the best all-ahead full maneuvers in the game, in many respects, because it goes much faster than a typical all-ahead full maneuver, giving you that burst of speed, allowing you to close the gap much faster and more efficiently than all-ahead full. It does run out faster, though, which does mean that recharging faster is going to often be a good thing. The next thing that Evil Sunz has is the tractor cannon, and combined with their ability to sort of more often burst ahead with full bit of speed there, and the good Ork upgrades for those sorts of boosts, they've got the lots of thrusters here, making them even better at that. They could also even take the turbo booster, but I don't recommend it personally. They can actually close a gap extremely well, and then use the tractor cannon once they're in that range. It's got 7,500 range, which is pretty good. If they can get into that range, you can start tractor cannoning people in, and even if they're a little bit farther away, you can use another tractor cannon and get that ship right stuck in the middle of your entire fleet, making it impossible for them to really sort of play against that sort of long range hope that they would want to have. You can pull in one ship and absolutely destroy it with the Orks, and if you find your ships getting isolated and destroyed one by one against the Orks, then that's probably one of the reasons why, is that they're very good at isolating ships and destroying them one at a time. To counteract the Evil Sunz, in a lot of cases, I just don't bother trying to be at long range against them. I don't try to kite them. I'm going to have to get rammed, because that's something that tractor cannons are also very good at, but if you can manage to keep your ships so that they're capable of dealing close range damage against those Ork ships, if they're able to win in exchange with close range, then it sort of negates the point of the tractor cannon quite badly. Next up are the Blood Axes. That's what I've got fitted on my bashes here. These guys have the ability to run silently, unlike other Orks. This means that if your opponent is trying to do... there's a particular cheeky strategy you can do against non-Blood Axes Orks, which is you can get a light scout of some sort, just runs in there, detects all the Orks, and then the rest of your fleet pounds at those Orks from extremely long range while moving directly away from them. And Orks can only blitz forward for a certain distance. This would mean that the Ork fleet is revealed, whereas the opposing fleet is not revealed. And if the Orks find themselves in that situation, they can find themselves getting picked away, especially if they don't have enough torpedoes. So this lets them simply hit run silently to stop some of those tracking torpedoes, for example, are a prime example of what people would use in this situation, or ordnance would be another thing that people would use in this situation. It lets you simply hit run silently to cancel those sort of torpedo attacks or those bomber attacks. The other thing that they've got is the Nova Cannon, and the Nova Cannon is actually quite good for causing people to close with the Orks, because they're able to get so many Nova Cannons for so cheap that if an opponent tries to keep at long distance while they're under torpedo attack, while they're under Nova Cannon attack, they're going to be taking humongous amounts of unretaliated damage. And this means that you have to get close to these ships to properly fight against them. Otherwise, you're simply going to be taking too much damage, you're going to be dodging too many shots, and you're eventually going to get destroyed. So that's how this fleet compels an opponent to come forward. It basically gives them a trade-off choice. They can either take that bombardment from the Nova Cannons, where they're probably taking more damage than they're able to dish out because there's so many of them, or they can get in close and try and fight those Ork ships from close range. Often the best way to fight against this is to be at that 6,000 range, which is where the less dangerous Ork cannons are. Now, it is very, very difficult, however, unfortunately, to remain at exactly 6,000, and I'd say virtually impossible. I'd say actually impossible if you consider the fact that the Ork ships can just boost towards you. Next up is the Goth clan. They have no ability to force an opponent close to them, just basically better at close range. It's making the Orks better at what they're already really good at, which normally would be a good thing, but they're so weak against kiting that taking Goths is actually a really bad choice because it leaves you completely vulnerable to kiting. You can combine it with Evil Suns. I've done that before. It is extremely effective in that particular case, but in that case you want one Goth ship and then an entire rest of your fleet being Evil Suns. Lastly, you've got the Bad Moons here. They've got similar sort of mindset to Evil Suns, but they're a little bit more versatile in some respects. They've got the ability to use the Shock Attack Mega Cannon, which gives them 2 critical chances against most ships. This is actually an extremely powerful ability if you want to catch up to an enemy fleet. You simply need to use a Grot on a Rock, which is their equivalent to the Recon Beacon, to get vision of an enemy ship, and then you suddenly just try and disable the ever-loving crap out of their engines. And they'll be able to repair that, but then you use the rest of your Shock Attack Mega Cannons against that ship again, probably disable the engines again, at which point you've got one enemy ship that is incapable of limping away from you for a very long time before they can repair that again. And you're probably going to be able to catch up to that ship and destroy it, again, letting you do the piecemeal sort of thing. But if your opponent actually turns out to be a close range fleet, the Shock Attack Mega Cannons can actually still be pretty useful, unlike the Evil Suns one. Well, the Evil Suns Tractor Cannon is actually still useful for ramming, but this also lets you disable shields and other weapon systems, as well as their engines, so it can be used in other ways if you really want to. So all of these are sort of things that could be used against you, and if you're playing against the Orks and find yourself thinking, I've got to keep away from these ships, and finding yourself incapable of doing so, that is probably why. It's probably because of their favors. Recognizing which favor they've got and realizing that you might not be able to keep away from your ships, and trying to run away from them might result in your fleet being destroyed piecemeal, might mean that you want to get in mixed up with the Orks and use your broadsides against them as well, which can work, it can end poorly. This is one of the reasons why I think Orks are one of the best factions in the game right now. It's very difficult to play against their weaknesses because their weaknesses are things that they're very capable of shoring up and taking advantage of. Lastly, special note has to be made for the gunship, the Savage. The Savage is equipped with 2 heavy cannon, and the heavy cannon, again, 4 damage per second, each giving it 8 damage per second. This blows other escorts out of the water in terms of damage per second by so much that I actually think these are highly worth it in a lot of situations. That damage is attached to a chassis that has 75 armor to the front and is front firing. So if you are using these guys, you can deal a lot of damage to enemy ships with these things. I absolutely adore them in a lot of situations. They are extremely potent for dealing a lot of damage to ships. Now, I wouldn't necessarily always recommend taking them, however, because Orks still have that trait that makes them much more likely to revolt. Where can we find that damn thing here? Disorganized, chance of insubordination, 4% for an escort ship loss. So they're much more likely to run from the battle if you lose a bunch of these escort ships here. So there is a risk and a trade-off to taking these, but on the other hand, if you take an entire fleet of gunships never run from a fight, so you could actually just also swarm an enemy with these things. The only real disadvantage to these guys is that they don't have access to any real upgrades, unfortunately, for their gun. And if you could change these to 6,000 range guns, or have better lock-on orders or something like that, or better accuracy, any of that would have really helped out, but as it is, these things are still a fantastic weapon system. I think that they're one of the best escorts in the game. And they are something that you're going to have to watch out for. If you're up against Orks and you see some escorts, you can't really brush them off like you would a normal one. And they're also fairly hard to kill. That 75 armor to the front really does add a lot of survivability to these things. And if they go on a brace for impact, you're basically not going to be able to kill them with macro weaponry. And you're not even going to be able to ram them that effectively. They're actually quite durable against that sort of thing if they're on brace for impact. Yeah, so that's all the things that you're typically going to lose against when you're playing against Orks. Remember sort of the basics here. Ork ships often have a strong and a weak flank that you could be attacking, and if they don't, you'll often be able to out DPS any one given side if they've decided to spread their weapons across multiple sides. The next thing to note, a lot of their best weapons are short range within 3,000. If you can skirt past that 3,000 or only stay in that 3,000 range for a very short period of time, then you'll take a lot less damage. And of course, lastly, don't necessarily want to let your fleets get split apart by trying to run away from orcs. If they're capable of catching up to you, you might have to turn and use your entire fleet to fight, lest you lose your entire fleet piecemeal. Alright, so let's go ahead and try and get into a fight here and see how things go. Alright, so we find ourselves playing as orcs, unfortunately against orcs, which is a little bit unfortunate. We've got two bashes here. They've got the heavy guns on the side there, and we've got, of course, two savages, because we can take two of those and fill out our points quite nicely. Now we're going to have these guys be on front firing behavior, and we might also want them to be automatically set to lock on behavior, but we'll put them on the brace for impact for now, I guess, actually. Alright, so we're going to set up some of these automated systems here, but we're all just about ready to go. Now, the thing about orc versus orc combat is it's a little bit derpy, in all honesty. My opponent has got 4 ships as well, of course. That's just sort of the way of things. And 2 of them are stealth for some reason. I'm assuming that they're in a gas cloud. Yeah, we can sort of see them crawling out of there at this point in time. And we can start launching some torpedoes, I guess, at long range here. These are not really going to hit, but we might as well fire them off regardless.
The fight is over here.
Now, we do want our ships to be on side-firing behavior for our capitals, because these light cruisers are equipped to those heavy guns on the sides, which does mean that their damage per second is going to be much higher if I'm able to keep my opponent within 3,000 using those particular guns. Now, since my opponent is also orcs, I have no idea what type of weapon configurations they might also have. And I don't even know if they've got savage gunships, but if I was against a real player, I can almost guarantee that those escorts would be savage gunships. Unless you're playing against Eldar, in which case you would use the brute ram ship, in my opinion. You know, just because they're fast enough to actually keep up with the Eldar ships to a certain extent. But
Here we go.
oh, managed to turret one down. That's unfortunate. Going to find out I'm moving directly towards escorts, but whatever. In any event, yes, because I don't know what type of weapons my opponent is going to have, it's going to be very important for me to try and analyze what they've got quickly, and then figure out the best direct approach to them to deal the maximum amount of damage to them without taking as much damage myself, which is a tricky thing to do in the heat of a game. It's something that's actually, I think, a little bit too hard in the case of orcs, but what can you do sometimes? Alright, so we're going to go ahead and turn our ships over this way.
Move that space junk.
Let's go ahead and try and blitz out of that. Oh, damn it.
You got it.
Almost got out of it.
Enemy ship sighted. Which is best?
Alright, so we're going to try and get the ship out of the way of all this nonsense here. Why has my opponent got a...
Can we go faster? Yeah. Orks. Building is what orks do best.
My opponent has the Goth upgrade for some reason, I think, which is a little bit peculiar.
You got it, boss.
Lost the front weapon for this ship, which is the torpedo launcher, which is fine.
Get 'em, boss.
Alright, so you can see that my opponent's ships look like they're designed for the side fire as well, but a little bit less extremely than mine, so we're able to deal some good damage here.
You want us over there?
And this one's using lots of guns, so we can keep the broadside of that ship there and not be threatened really at all.
Move that space junk.
Let's try and keep the ship on our flank here. Try and target this guy's weapons here. Oh. Not entirely sure what the hell did that, but...
What do you want?
0 damage from our torpedoes, good.
Fight is over here. Here we go. Can we go faster?
Again, we're just focusing down one of the enemy ships here with these heavy guns here.
Here we go.
Got one of their ships destroyed.
Which is best?
Taking a little bit of damage constantly from this ram ship here, but
You got it.
going to mostly ignore that.
Here we go.
Front weapon from this ship been destroyed. It's their more dangerous weapon.
The fight is over here.
Lost all of the guns from this ship here. That's unfortunate. We'll use it to ram this brute ram ship here. Set from firing behavior.
Time to stump 'em.
Now, orcs are slightly micro-insensitive in many respects. Oh, wow, that did a lot more damage than I thought it was going to do. Doing a little bit of damage there.
Orks is best. You want us over there? You got it, boss.
Let's just get this ship so that it's in a ready position.
Hold on to Sammy. Orks, orks, orks. We's ready.
Dealt some good damage on that pass there.
We's ready.
Alright, we're just gonna ram the ram ship here.
Fix it.
There we go.
Here we go.
Just because it's a nice, quick way of dealing with that problem there.
Faster.
Alright, let's get this guy's engine, or this guy's generators, rather.
Move that space jump. You got it. Here we go.
Alright, so now we've completely defanged this ship here.
The fight is over
I knew that I
here.
could beat it in a broadside-to-broadside fight, so that's what we've been trying to do as much as possible.
You got it,
A lot of
boss.
maneuvering required to actually do that, because you want to be closer than 3,000 with orc ships in particular. Really?
Orks over there. Orks, orks, orks.
There we go.
We's ready.
Should have actually done that slightly differently. Could have gotten all four,
What
but...
you want? You want us over there?
Alright, let's go right up the tailpipe of this guy.
Can we go faster?
And there we go. So, in sum there, despite the fact that the AI was cheating and had a slightly more expensive ship than they were supposed to be allowed to have, with the Goth mark there for some reason, yeah, we mostly just made sure that our ships were using the right facing. We focused down the more dangerous of the ships, which is another thing that you can do if they've got a variety, but we were keeping clear of their more dangerous arcs whenever we could, and making sure that they were on our dangerous arc. So that is something that if your opponent is doing that with their orcs, making sure that you're in that 3,000 range, when especially since he had like the 6,000 range lots of guns, he could have kept at further range potentially. But if you've got those short range guns that your opponent's using, try and keep out of the range of that. If you've got sort of weaker front fire, then probably let him sort of fire torpedoes at you rather than letting him fire that side gun, and try and deal with them as best as you can in whichever way is most safe once you've discovered what that is. Tricky thing to do, I know, but that is sort of the way orcs work. Anyway, I hope you found this video enjoyable, and of course, as always, I hope to see you guys all next time.